Hello and welcome to the ministry. And this morning it's a bit chilly, so I came out. May not stay out here for all of these, but the first one I'm going to do is we're going to talk about what it feels like to be in the valley. When you're in a valley, it feels like you're between two tall, surmountable mountains, and you can't really feel like you can get out of it. You look ahead of you and the path looks extremely long to get out. You look behind you, there's nothing back there to get to, and you have two surmountable mountains that you're looking at on either side, and you're like, how am I going to get out of here? I've walked through several situations that were like this, and this is what I can tell you: that when you are seeing scenarios like this, one, you're in a season where you're being prepared to graduate into something else. You left behind a season that you were comfortable in. You left behind a season that you've already passed the test. You've already gone through it. You graduated. You knew that season so well that it was like, oh my God, this was great. But you went through a hurdle. For me, in high school, my hurdle was just before I graduated. 5 weeks into my senior year, my mother passed away. So you can imagine, as a female who's in her senior year of high school, that was the hardest time frame for me to have to go through a valley of trying to figure out how to get through that. And it actually wasn't the first 5 weeks. It was the 5 weeks after she came home. So it was right around Christmas. That's what was the hurdle, because Christmas was our time of year. So it was almost like having your knees swept out from under you in the most impactful year of your life. And I had to still finish my senior year. Then to boot on top of that, I got sick, and because I'd been helping her throughout those last few months, I'd missed a lot of time. So when I got sick, they actually kicked me out of school for a week. And I couldn't come back without my father coming in to give permission for me to come back to school, because they needed to talk to me. But because of everything that had gone on, when we had to sit down and have that conversation, and it would finally explain to the counselor person that what had happened, of everything that had happened, the counselor was like, why didn't you tell us that this was happening in your life? And my thing is this: for one, when you grow up with parents that say, what goes on in this house stays in this house, you're not that kind of person to tell everything that's going on in your personal life. You go through valleys by yourself. So I went through that. I managed to graduate high school, and that was the last thing I graduated from. My next valley period was immediately afterwards, when I realized that I had no identification because all of my identification paperwork was messed up. Why? Because when I was born, I was adopted and had a completely different name, and none of the paperwork matched to get me my legal documentation. So if you go and this is an interesting lesson, that if you go to any of the bureaus and you have documentation, even if it's your documentation and it has the name that you had all of your life, but your birth documentation has completely different name on it, they won't give you your birth certificate, which you need in order to get your social security card, in order to get your ID, in order to get your birth certificate. And it's a weird, sick cycle. So I had to go through an entire year or so trying to fight to get my identity and claim that I was the person that was on the paperwork. So when I say I understand valleys, I understand valleys. And then my next valley season, after I got out of that, I started going to college. My next valley season was just instability. Dealing with a lot of instability. And not really having anybody to talk to about the instability I was going through at that time. And I would slip into seasons. It seemed like every time I got close to a victory, graduating, passing my finals or whatever, something would be swept out from under my feet. Whether it be I'd have to move and go somewhere else or something like that. And because of that, it seemed like, is this what my life is going to be? My next valley season was I came out of college after 5.5 years, and for 2 years I had nothing to do because I couldn't get a job no matter how much I tried, and my valley was I couldn't get a job. And during that season of my life, I had to sit down and say to myself, what do I want out of my life? And that's when I started sitting there and I said, what do I really want out of my life? I actually ended up going back to college online for a year. And that was the beginning of me coming out of that second valley season. Maybe it was a third, I don't know. And it was a dark season for me, but I actually started my own fashion blog and all of this, and everything was going well for me, and things started to pick up. I was in college, things were coming together, all these things. And I started to see a horizon, and I gave my life to God during that period of time. And things started to really pick up for me. But then I shifted. I realized the things that I had been passionate about before my last valley season were no longer the things that I was passionate about in this season. And because of that, I ended up walking away from the one thing that I had loved my entire life, and that was fashion design. And that was right when my fashion blog was starting to really pick up. But I had no more passion for it. And the reason I walked away, and I will say this as a child of God, I had a vision. And in that vision, I saw myself with long red hair, in my full fashion outfit, walking the red carpet as whatever fashion blogger I was trying to be at the time. And I realized something. My eyes were dead. I fought to get to that place, and I was unhappy. And when I had that vision, I decided to let it go. And I started following God. And from that, I started writing my book. From that, I started following ministers. From that, I started going to church. From that, I started doing what it took. From that, I had to fight against the people that were around me that didn't understand why I was changing my entire life, for what reason it was I had chosen to walk away from the very thing that I was passionate about and didn't want to do what they told me to do, because I was trying to find who I was. I was trying to find myself in that season, because I'd let go of what I was passionate about. I was walking into another valley because I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't know how to get to where God was telling me. What was God telling me? Well, he had two people on two separate occasions prophesied two separate things to me about four separate industries. And I was like, wait, what? And I really didn't know what it was. And so I decided, after I left my godmother's, ironically, and I went to stay with my dad for another season. And that's funny, because this is what God does to me. God has a tendency, before a major shift, he drops me with my father. There you go, guess where I'm at right now? With my dad. It's a physical manifestation of God. You may not like it all the time, but it's God's way. And he was telling me I was supposed to move to New York at the time. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I was seeing it everywhere. I'm seeing something else this season, but seeing two very important things this season. Something I was seeing throughout my Valley season, but I'm like, okay, I see what you're saying. I'm also seeing what you're saying. Okay, whenever you're ready, God. But during that next Valley season, I was dropped into a dark place. And when I say that season was dark, it was dark. I walked through a month in a very dark season. It was about 6 weeks of a very dark season in my life, where I had no place to go. And then I had a health injury. Well, not a health injury. It's an injury that could have killed me. I had a major fall. And it's something funny. The devil hates me in stairs for some reason, because as I think back in my life, I've always had an incident and had issues with stairs. But it's weird. From about the time I hit around, it was just before my mother passed away, high school, I had an issue with escalators. I couldn't walk up and down the escalator without pausing, and I couldn't figure out why. I figured out why that year, because that year I had a massive incident where I was thrown from an escalator, and I nearly died. I could have died, but because of God's grace, I got up from that. I got up, and I actually walked away from having been thrown from 10 feet up, because that's how high the escalator had taken me by the time I was thrown backwards. But the way I landed, I did not land on my head, I landed on my side. And I got up and walked away from that. It was sore, but I got up and walked away from that. And I knew God was helping me, because one, before it happened, somebody warned me to take the elevator, but I didn't. Between the time that I was warned to take the elevator and the time that I actually took the escalator was about an hour difference, so I'd forgotten the person said what they said. Fast forward about a month later, where God had placed me in a resting space for about 6 weeks, I ran into a woman who, all she did was she rested her hands on my side, on my shoulder, and she prayed for me. When I tell you, I couldn't lift anything on that side for 6 weeks. The next morning, I walked into my room at the time. I had a huge suitcase. I lifted the entire suitcase with that very arm that I could not move the day before. When I say God works and He's a miracle worker, He works. I haven't had much pain from that arm since. Even now, I sleep on an uncomfortable couch, and I may have had a little bit of pain in it once. Over that next 3.5 years, when I say I walked through a valley, I walked through a valley. Every generational curse that my family was dealing with, I faced in real time, in front of my face, every day. And I had to ask the Lord, why am I seeing this? Why am I going through this? Why do I have to experience this? I mean, nights where I was seeing things, people doing an when I tell you, it was a pressure cooker waiting to happen. Either I was going to walk out of that with my full mind, or I was going to walk out of there crazy. As you see, I'm not crazy. Some days I felt like I was when I was in that experience. Let me just say this. Any person walking through a season of homelessness, and I'm a person that I go to the soup kitchens, I feed people, I've been there to the churches, I've helped the homeless, I've worked with them. Anybody going through that, let me explain to you, you are a strong person to have walked through that, because not many people will walk out of that with full mindset afterwards. Okay? So when I tell you I walked through a valley, but my last year, before I came back from New York, I spent it in a hotel. That was my healing season from that season. And I dealt with one of the most major spiritual attacks I'd ever had in my life from a person that had a very, very narcissistic spirit on them. And I didn't really know what to do with it. I prayed, I fasted, I fought in the spirit. And finally, I was able to walk out of that season. And I ended up in this one. I've been in this one for about a year, healing and recuperating from that season. And what am I saying by saying all of this? You will go through your valleys. You will go through your dark seasons. You will go through your ups and downs. But the point is, you do not die in those seasons, which brings me to the 5 points I had. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Psalms 23, King James Version. Did you realize that the Samaritan woman had to go somewhere else to survive? I actually knew somebody that was like this. They had to go through a season where they were going through some things, and they had to walk through it until they got to their other side. Joseph was put into slavery. I know what that feels like now. The blind man had to go through to get to the pool of Bethesda, because the pool of Bethesda was not where the blind man was, but the Lord sent him to go wash that mud off. Someplace he had to crawl over rocks. He had to get to all these places. He couldn't send him to some place that was right nearby. He had to journey to get to that place, and he could not see. Naaman had to dip his body into a pool of putrid water that was not near where he was in order to get his leprosy off. And finally, Ruth had to walk with Naomi to the new city. But Orpah couldn't take the walk through the valley. We all have our valleys that we have to walk through. Joseph had to go from slavery, to get out of slavery, to go right back to jail. I've never been to jail, but where I was felt like it. I left that place for a month. I actually went to a convent for 3 weeks. I went to another place that had amazing food. Only to end up right back at that same place at the very midpoint of that entire experience. And it was an experience that I wouldn't wish on nobody. I wouldn't. But it's through those experiences that we gain distance. We walk through this hard place. You have to press through. You're going to scrape your knees. You're going to go through falls. You're going to crawl to try to get out of that place. You're going to beg God to get out of that place. You're going to beg God to get over that next hurdle so you can stand up again. And in that second, you're going to have to keep pushing. Because you get it all back at the end. Even though sometimes it doesn't feel like it. The Shunammite woman, she ended up at the right place at the right time. And the king bestowed upon her an assistant to go back and get everything she lost. The Queen of Sheba walked to Solomon. And when she went to Solomon with a gift, he would give her the answer to anything she wanted to know. Ruth got the queenship because she got to marry the most eligible bachelor in the city. Joseph went from prison to king, an emperor, prime minister. Naaman dipped in that pool and he came out with baby soft skin and completely healed and cured of his leprosy. The blind man, he got his sight back. They all got what they really needed, and they left it behind. They left behind everything that they had walked through in that valley and were fully and completely blessed. So with this I say, Ephesians 3:20. Exceedingly, abundantly greater than you could ever ask for or think. But it comes to you with the faith that worketh within you. This is Taj McCameron. for the ministry. I hope this blessed you, because it's a blessing to me. Until next time.